Welcome to our seminar, Questions Every Church Should Ask Now. So we've been talking a lot about assessment. We've talked about personal assessment if you've been watching the NAFWB Facebook site. Today we're going to talk about how important it is for churches to assess. And so I want to encourage you to participate. If you've got a question, send that to us at questions@nafwb.org. If something pops in your mind while you're watching this webinar, if you're watching it live, we want to encourage you to put a question in there and we're going to do our best to respond. If you've got something that's lengthier or maybe something that's private, please send that to us at questions@nafwb.org. And these are the kind of things you can ask us at any point. So I know some of you are going to be watching this on YouTube or Facebook later. You've got questions about how you could apply this in your own church or certain situations that you have, just email us and we'll do our best to help you. If we don't know what to do to help you, we'll try to find someone who does. So welcome, Brother Clint Morgan. I don't think he's a stranger to our audience, director of IM. And Brother Clint, you guys have done a lot of assessment with IM to try to be as effective as you can be as an organization.
We do, and every year we do not just a personal evaluation, but we do an organizational health evaluation. To try to find out where we are. So we really believe in the power and the importance of assessment. I think when it comes to the local church, though, we might have a tendency sometimes to sort of let things. It's sort of and I don't want to say a slow death, but almost like that.
Yes.
And because it's God's work, we think, can we really evaluate this? Should we evaluate this? And I would say yes. Please do know that it's okay. It's okay to make an assessment. It's okay to evaluate.
Yes.
So absolutely.
And so I know our folks have been following IM. You can always go to the NAFWB website. Like you can look at the digest of reports. You can read what Brother Clint puts in there, and sometimes he'll talk about some of the assessment. But one of the key things is he talks about goals that they have. Mm-hmm. And you'll see like where they're at with that. And really what you're saying, Brother Clint, that's the outgrowth of some of this assessment that you all have
Absolutely.
done.
I mean, as you look and you say, this is where we are, this is where we want to go, how do we get there? Yeah. But if you don't do an honest assessment, I mean, sometimes it's sort of tough and you don't always like the answers you get.
Yes.
But if you can do that, you're much more likely to continuously be moving forward.
Yes, that's right. And as a pastor, we used to have a deacon retreat. So you may not be able to do what we're about to talk about with your deacons, but we're going to talk about trying to do it with church leaders. But we would do that where we would look at data. We're going to talk about what data to look at. And we would set goals for what we're trying to do and accomplish in the community. And I'm with you, Brother Clint. I think it really helped us to take an honest assessment, look at where we were at, and then to help us address some of our weaknesses, capitalize on our strengths to better reach our community.
But I think, too, as you said about your church doing it on a regular basis, you know this is going to happen. We do it in mission. We call it labor camp. It's sort of fun. But the directors go off and we spend 3 or 4 days, and before, we have a lot of prayer, we have a lot of discussion, but we start making that list throughout the year and we say, okay, when we get to labor camp, we want to evaluate this, we want to look at this. And so when we go with anticipation of doing an honest evaluation, and then we want to walk away with our strategic goals and objectives based on that assessment.
So what I picked up from that was you were prepared, you had your data together, you went away from, like you're not here in our building now, and so it was a special time. People were prepared for that. I will say I think that's a good model. That's kind of the thing we did too. Sometimes we would even go and we'd stay at a hotel, or we didn't spend a night there, but we did do the conference room and that kind of thing, just to get out of your normal situation and have your data.
Yeah. And it may not, and we understand everyone can't go out to a hotel or can't go to, and that's totally understandable, but you can perhaps even find like a local hotel or a local restaurant that would give you a room, or you could have a room, but you'll want to make that, this is what this day's about.
Excellent. Yes, so it's a special set of time moment, and so you do it however it works for you, but it does help that way. We do encourage you to take a look in your Bibles in Revelation 2 and 3. We're not going to go through that a lot, but just notice that that's what's happening. The Lord is assessing those churches, and he says, I know thy works. So he stopped and he's looked and he said, this is what you're doing. This is what you're not doing. These are things you need to do. And so we just bring that up to point out this is a biblical thing, to stop and to assess where we're at. And it's something the Lord actually does of us. So let's start out with a first question a church needs to ask, and that is, what are the strengths of your church?
Mm-hmm. And, then you're asking, in what areas of the church life, or do you sense that you're maximizing your resources and everything that you have available to accomplish your mission? Understanding what your church is about, honestly, you need to almost go back to that. Does your church have a purpose? And you say, well, yeah, the Bible tells that. And I'd say that's an excellent place to start.
Yes.
But you want to go back and say, okay, how are we using our resources and, that to really get us where we want to go? And I think every church, no matter how weak it seems, still has strengths.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things you just mentioned was kind of like knowing your core values and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we need to stress, yesterday, on Wednesday, we had a blog that went out. Actually, you wrote it and talked about, core strengths, the things that a church needs to have, talk about worship and so forth. So it's not a bad idea to stop and look at that so that we're not just into things we would like. But the other thing you mentioned was every church has strengths. And so we're gonna do that. I will say, as you look at some of the literature on this, sometimes they talk about getting information on traffic. And so I think we're able to put up on the screen an example where someone could go to the Tennessee Department of Transportation. They could get information on traffic for their how much goes by their church if they wanted to. It's almost like you say, hey, I'm inviting you to Tippett's Chapel, if you will, and if they don't know, then you've got a little bit of an issue, with that. So that's really the key with that, some of the data points.
And I think understanding the resources you have available, that's part of the evaluation, but are you maximizing those resources? You may have a room full of material, or you may have really a lot of finances or whatever it may be, but are you maximizing those resources?
Good. And so like maximizing on the location, are you putting signs out, directional signs for your church and so forth? Look at attendance. And we've talked about this. It's kind of interesting. This is kind of a no-brainer, Easter #1 attendance, but what are the other big attendance
The thing
times?
that just really rocked me when I saw this was every Sunday in December. Now, you've got the top 15, I think, but and looking at that top 15, but every Sunday in December, you think, boy, December is a focal month.
Yes.
I mean, if you're going to maximize and focus on something, just say, we have more people coming in the month of December. Every Sunday's on that list, and that's crazy to me. Of course, like I said, Easter, Mother's Day, I think hit the top.
Yes.
I don't know what happened to Father's Day. I'm a little
I don't
disappointed
know. We're getting left out, and we know that COVID has skewed this some. So, but you can also watch, who's watching online, information like that. But this attendance information is very critical. As a pastor, I used to watch, what's our average attendance from year to year, but I compared Sunday to Sunday, and that's what you see in some of these surveys. Suck it Sunday in December, Easter to Easter, and that gives you a better picture. Again, COVID has skewed this a bit, but we want to monitor that and just try to do what we can to see where we're at. Then we get into giving. So even with COVID, whereas attendance might have gone down, giving has
many churches
gone
pretty
up
good
in some cases. But you can tell a lot giving, and if you're trying to borrow money, you already know this. They want to know your giving units and so forth, so you look at that. And then we've also got up here like doing a church census, and that would basically be looking at the demographics of your church, the ages of your church, the male versus female and so forth, and even things like blue-collar or white-collar workers, what kind of work people do. And boy, the church survey. So you got to be careful if you do a church survey we've got a sample for you where you just ask folks to tell them, what you think about things. They seem to tell you things without a filter. So you've got to be careful, why does brother so-and-so do such and such? So you've got to handle this stuff with care, but some of this can be helpful, can't it?
And I think also in an evaluation or a survey like this, people need to know why.
Yes.
What are you going to do with this information?
Yes.
And, if they feel like you're just being nosy or, if there's an ulterior motive that's not good for any way they perceive that, they're not going to answer, or they're going to give us very, very skewed answer. But I would say if you do a survey, let them know, say, what we are trying to, figure out here is this.
Good.
So please figure out, please answer this survey.
Yes.
And, there's no personal information on this survey at all. You know, that you're not like revealing your social security number or anything.
No, yeah.
But you're trying to help look at our church and say, these are our strengths. This is what we can do. And
yes.
It's a good, simple survey, and people ought to be willing to do it. But I really feel like it's important they know why.
Yes, I think you're right. And I think we don't have this up, but this is a question you might think of adding. Have you invited anyone to church, in the last year? Why or why not? And sometimes it gives us a feel like, for example, we don't have what feels like a safe nursery.
That'd be a big one.
I don't understand that, but then I know I need to address that so people feel more comfortable inviting people. So I think you have nailed it. We don't want information just for information's sake. This is kind of like total quality improvement. We're trying to figure out what we can do to make our situation
I think
better.
too, and I don't know if this is in the for what it's worth category. Sometimes people, we don't want the church to feel like this is a corporation or this is a business.
Yes.
But this is God's work.
Yes.
And I think if we can look at it just as God's work, and we're really trying to do this to our very best, and we as humans have our strengths and we have our weaknesses, and we need to talk about them. We need to address these issues. So I think let's raise the level. It's just not just an evaluation and then we take it and go, stick it in the files cabinet somewhere and say we did a great evaluation.
Yes.
What are we going to do with this?
So do all to the glory of God.
Yeah,
so we're
absolutely.
trying to do our best. Now, who should be involved? We talk about brainstorming with the vital few. How are we trying to do that?
And again, I love to do strategies and talk. And I on the mission field, and I hope it's okay if I talk about the mission field.
Absolutely.
But when I was on, the mission field, there were some missionaries that loved to talk about strategies, and there were others like, don't bore me with this. Knowing that everyone's not going to get into something like this, and especially when it comes down to the analysis part of it, and start thinking strategically about how we do this. So if you can say, try to find those who are really interested, really committed, are going to get into it, and try to get the others to understand, say, look, if you want to join in, it's fine, but it's not like you're excluding people, but you're inviting people who are really interested in it and really want to help. And you want it to be, you hope it's leadership or those that are potential leadership.
Yes. We tried to do it with our deacons or people that were they talk about like the 80-20 rule, the people that were really influential in ministry and so forth. And so we encourage you to do that as well, but it's the kind of thing we should always be thinking through personally.
Let me get stuck there a moment, just if we
Yes.
can. That 80-20 has always intrigued me, and I'm telling you, I think it's almost the perfect number.
Yeah.
If you do evaluation, number of people that are, and for those who, I think this is what we're saying. In a church, if you have 100, there are about 20 of them that are really actually involved, engaged in ministry. And I had a wonderful experience one time in Central Asia, in one of our countries, and honestly, it was almost like the opposite. 80% were involved and 20% weren't. And I go, man, maybe in our evaluation we think, how can we get more people, involved? And but I think that's the reality. Evaluations have proven that, assessment have proven that. That's about an 80-20, almost. That's what you're finding.
Yeah.
And that's a big important question. Is that the way it should be in the church? And I don't think so, but we could get stuck there.
So what else can we do to maybe involve some more? And so that's part of what you want to think of, again, as long as they're interested, and wanting to participate.
And you could go to the very basic. One of the strengths of every church is people in the pews.
Yes.
Every person there has potential to be a strength for your church.
Absolutely.
They really do. And, if we think of ways, how can we encourage these people to bring their giftedness, their resources, what they have, and benefit the larger church, the community as a whole. But, let's try not to be satisfied with 20%.
Yes, just a small number there.
Yeah, but it's true.
So here's some questions to ask to pick up some of your strengths. What is your church known for in the community?
That'd be an interesting question, wouldn't it? I mean, it
really
really is. How do you know?
So is it known for its good preaching, its music, the youth programs? These would be positives, maybe sports programs and so forth, your outreach. And then, are you clear about your mission? Do other people know that? Do they know your core values, your goals, your objectives, and so forth? Another thing to ask is, do you have strong staff or church leaders, or we might even say volunteers that are ready and willing, productive, and happy, and if their staff, paid well, and that kind of thing. But those are just questions to get people kind of thinking a little bit about that. And I think you mentioned, are there programs your church has developed that are unique to you, something you're known for in your community?
And I think, a lot of that is sensitivity to the needs of your community. And you look around and there's no one beside you. And it may be a benevolent work. It may be a sports program. It may be an arts and crafts. Yes. It may be a music, teaching languages. There's so many things you can do.
Yes.
But you have to know what that community, what that need is. Yeah. And again, there are people probably sitting there in your church that can do these things if they're given the opportunity. And that's where you say, okay, we have this opportunity, and which we're going to talk about later. But then our strength is you. Our strength is our people.
Yeah,
our strength is dedicated people.
That.
Yep. Yeah, really.
That's good. Ask, is your church attractive? So we're talking about like curb appeal. Does it fit in the community, where it's located and so forth? In other words, does it fit in with the kind of neighborhoods and so forth that are around it?
That's tough sometimes because a church, and I have a perfect, example in my head, which I'm not going to say, but of a church that was built and in a certain time, and then a whole new community popped up across, and I'm talking about an upscale, high-end,
yes.
And here's a church, they're nice buildings, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it wasn't, but it didn't fit that community.
Yeah.
And no one from this new community is going to be attracted to
right.
it. And how do you do that?
Right.
That's another question.
But that would be a weakness.
Yeah,
well,
we'll go there in a minute.
If you do work, it's a strength.
But I think it's and that is you probably do the same thing. But when I drive along, and I see church, I go, boy, that's beautiful.
Yes.
And then
yes.
You go, man, they need to get somebody out there to
yes.
do some work.
That's
and
what
even
you're talking about.
we know we're going to go to church, but how does a non-believer or someone who's looking for a church, what do they see? If it's attractive.
Yeah.
I think it's a big plus.
There you go.
It's you're up front. So it is very
It's good.
important. Yep.
We've given some possible strengths that we found. The long-term membership, good reputation, rich and lengthy history. Maybe you could type in now in the comment section some other strengths you might think of or look at. And of course, if you've got questions about this, you could email us at questions@nafwb.org, and we try to help out with that. There are some we think you could do in Revelation 2 and 3. The Lord does lay out with each of those churches their strengths. Sometimes it was their doctrine or perseverance, or they were faithful, or their love and their service, or at least they had a little strength, It's interesting, in each of those churches, the Lord laid out something that was a strength, and so that's what we want to do as well. Now, here's the elephant in the room, the weaknesses. So what are the weaknesses of your churches, of your church? What areas of your church need attention? And really by weaknesses, we're talking about like something, factors that are existing or they have existed in the recent past that affect a church's performance. And we hate to use the word performance, but what we mean is reaching people in your community.
Fruitfulness, we can use whatever word we like. And that's, another thing, let's don't get hung up on our semantics here. What's the essence of what we're trying to say? What is it that is really keeping us from moving, hindering us from moving forward
Yes.
and being fruitful and, being effective. I mean, I love that word. And that's all these things have to be determined, but what is keeping us, if you know what the church is about, that's another thing. Understanding that, we go back to that, but you say, okay, what is keeping us from being effective, being fruitful? So those are good.
So look at your your ministries, your outreach, your leadership training, discipleship, what kind of benevolent work. Music's a big one. You'll get some information on that with your surveys, I'm sure. Pastoral, hospital visitation and so forth, world outreach, involvement in the community. So those are things to look at. We have on the screen personnel needs. So too many staff or volunteers, usually not an issue for many, but occasionally they are.
And understaff is a big problem.
Yes.
And I really feel like that, that comes back into other issues too of resources but I think if we go back and say, we're maximizing our resources, maybe we need to focus on hiring staff. But they're not enough. But probably the biggest issue you have to be aware of here is, are they effective?
Yes.
And if you have staff, you may have adequate, you may not have enough, but is your staff doing what you're expecting it to do, and what they're, and I hate to say this, but what they're being paid. You are paying them, and you're employing them in that way, but we understand. And sometimes we get caught up in that, well, it's a ministry. Ministry is not a permission for laziness. I mean, if anything, when we put something in the category of ministry, it ought to raise every level you can think of as far as, as effectiveness and giving of yourselves and, reaching for excellence, pursuing excellence.
So this is hard. So this is why it's probably good to do it off the church campus, because you're talking about some serious things, and this also is hard because some of the people that you're actually needing
may be in the room.
They may be in the room. And so you got to really be careful about this. And this is why I also say we do this individually. Pastors, leaders, church folks are doing this in their mind a bit. You've got volunteers who've done something, they've led the singing for the last 25 years or whatever. How do you deal with this? So first thing is you just recognize these are our strengths, now these are our weaknesses. And it may not be that you can fix everything perfectly. You might find workarounds or so forth, but it's like you've got to own it. You've got to know this is an issue for us. Maybe we can offset in another area. Maybe we can fix this, if you will. But what are these particular weaknesses?
But we are going to take care of it. And I think we don't want to get bogged down in personnel, but I do firmly believe that if we take care of issues as they come up, you know what I'm saying? And in other words, I'm going to wait till evaluation time, and I'm going to hammer this guy or this lady, and we're going to bring them out, and we're going to tell. God forbid that we do that. Throughout the year, and as we are working together, if you see a brother, you see someone on staff, and there's weakness, talk to them. And try to give them an opportunity. And if you've dealt properly with someone, then you come to that meeting and say, hey, look, we've addressed this. We're not making progress. But to go in there and pull out all the guns, and that happens. They're wait for that moment, and they go, well, now I'm going to tell them exactly what I've been thinking. Well, if you haven't been telling what you've been thinking all year, you probably got to keep your mouth shut in a meeting for that level.
So you're saying we need an environment of kind of continuously evaluating and continuously talking about strengths and weaknesses. And I think what I hear you saying is sometimes we have a big meeting where we're going to really address something, and the guy, we never dealt with the first couple of things with him.
And it's coming. And sometimes it's a minor issue, but it's a weakness. It's hindering the progress of the church. It's hindering, what you're trying to do, the ministry of the church. Deal with it. Deal with it then. And then when you come later on, you know what? That actually becomes a strength for you. Because then you say, we had issues, we dealt with our issues, and therefore we move forward. So.
Often finances, they can be stagnant or depleted or overextended. A lot of debt. So we want to look at that. look at our community relationship. How are we doing with how do non-believers or other churches or even the government or professionals, how do they view us? In other words, what's that could be a weakness if they look at us negatively. And then are there areas that need attention, may demand major or minor adjustments? That's what you're just getting at, that we could improve or develop or upgrade or expand, or maybe in some cases even eliminate.
Yeah, and I think we need to be honest about that. There's some things we actually can just say, you know what, get rid of this. This is just
causing
cumbersome.
too much difficulty.
And it puts a drag on the wing, on the wing, and you're not flying well. And you can really eliminate. So that's part of an honest evaluation. Me say this is a weakness, but we're expending a lot of energy taking care of something that we don't need to be spending energy on, and you don't want to do that. I mean, you really don't.
So you usually know what your weaknesses are if you're willing to admit it. So if you don't, though, you can ask, what's some negative factors that have caught our attention in the last year?
And I think that's a good question to ask.
Yes.
And just say, okay, guys, what are some of the things that we've been having to deal with?
Right.
And hopefully we can
be proactive.
About it.
Yeah. And then have we done anything to address this? So if we're kind of meeting regularly, looking at things regularly, we're able to do this before they become too big.
Right.
But what is it that keeps popping up is what you're saying. What has perhaps hindered these issues from being addressed? And so is it because folks don't understand what the Bible says about it, or because we don't have the finances that we need, or the personnel, or we haven't planned, or we've not committed or programmed, or we just lack the spiritual fortitude to deal with it?
And that's scary.
It is.
I mean, and you put the first and the last thoughts there together. If we don't understand the biblical perspective on some of these issues, then we're probably going to lack the spiritual fortitude. We had an expression we used a lot in Africa. You have to be convinced to be convincing.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people just are not convinced. And therefore, if you're not convinced yourself that, this is the right way, this is the biblical way, this is, then you're not going to probably...
Yeah. It's not going to go anywhere.
Help a lot of people very much.
It's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And then some questions that you all ask a lot is, so who needs to take ownership of this particular issue?
A task needs a name.
Yes. And so that person's kind of working that problem and may come back and report back to the body about it. And then is this realistic, to think that we can overcome this weakness and so forth? So sometimes we're just trying to keep them. Sometimes there are things you can't do a lot about.
And it's not defeatism to say, we really just, we can't take care of it. We cannot do anything about this.
Yeah.
It really is out of our control.
Yeah.
And there are issues like that.
And work around or try to enhance other areas.
Right.
Some weaknesses are, like a shortage of handicap facilities. This is some material we've got somewhere else, or like being uninviting and so forth. Or volunteers are just overwhelmed. So you can type in the comment section weaknesses that you think of. And of course, if you've got questions about this, just send it to questions@nafwb.org and we'll try to provide some help.
And I would encourage people, don't be hesitant about it, because whatever weakness there or things you might be facing there, somewhere along the line, there are others too. That gives us an opportunity to talk about them more.
Absolutely. So. And it helps us to know also in designing resources that these are the kinds of weaknesses people are facing. Now, something we like talking about are opportunities. So what opportunities do you have at your church? And so with opportunities we're talking about, they can be internal, they can be external. In other words, part of your church or something on the outside, but it helps you if you pursue it to fulfill your purpose. And some opportunities we've come up with are, internal lay people, willing to serve, good stuff, creative thinkers that have some good ideas, new concepts and new converts, with new ideas that just need to be discipled. Maybe increased giving potential by some new members, leadership with renewed vision, a solid financial picture. Oh, that's an
Everybody loves that
opportunity.
one.
We do. Some new programs that are catching traction and like unity in the church. So
Big.
those are some internal opportunities. External opportunities are a good economy, community growth. Local government appreciates the Christian values of the church. We have that in some of our churches are located in areas where that's appreciated, some not, but anyway, if you are, it's an opportunity. Conferences that offer intellectual, emotional, and spiritual growth, and then if you're favored within the community, that's an opportunity.
And a lot of I think what we're seeing in Nashville, for example, and around, there are just communities popping up.
Yes.
And when a church is in a location and this new community pops up, I just say, wow. You talk about an open door, an opportunity, go get it. And then there are communities that are established, and this is probably a little stickier wicket here, but I still think it's an opportunity. There are communities that are established, but the dynamic, the demographic of that is changing. And some of the time we put that in a threat, which we'll talk about later.
Yes.
When anytime there are people coming in our community as believers, we should see that as an opportunity.
Good.
Yeah.
So you're in a growing area. That's an opportunity. Now, I know some of you are in rural areas and you've got people sliding away. We'll talk about that in a minute. But anything, and you're talking about like shifting demographics. So you're saying like a neighborhood is changing where your church is at. Don't look at that as a threat. Look at that as an opportunity to reach that particular
And it
population.
may be, and to be just very mundane and plain about this, sometimes it may be like an upscale. It's like I was telling you about the church that was not exactly a great facility sitting in the middle of this. That is, going to be a challenge. But sometimes it may be immigrants and refugees, people coming to your community, and we have had a tendency a lot of times to flee that. To run away from it instead of seeing it as an opportunity. That's just an example. But it could be a business that comes in. It could be a university that pops up there. It could be a lot of things that come in. I mean, every time there are people involved and growth in your community, that ought to be an opportunity
That's
for you.
good. That's good. So the location of your church is not an accident. So you think about, is there a university near you, organizations, opportunity is the internet now that we have. The way you're able to view this, you can show this to anyone in your church.
And what's happening in your community? What's right now, and I'm not, we don't want to talk political, but right now, the COVID thing.
Yes.
Are there opportunities to serve your community as it relates to this? And I think there are. There are many opportunities out there, but sometimes we look at these things and they just throw us off the rail instead of going, someone says that looking at these things that happen sometimes, looking at them as opportunities and not threats, but just saying, what can we do and how can we benefit?
Because it may make people more likely to look to
That's
the Lord.
More open, and I tell you, we've seen that too happen.
Where we have.
And there are people that may have left, but I think there are a lot of people that are coming and open to the gospel that have never been before. So
yes.
More so than ever.
In Revelation, the Lord talked about Philadelphia. He said they have an open door. So that was an example of an opportunity or a case study, if you will, in the Scripture. Now, this is as you're thinking of that, maybe you think of opportunities your church has, and so we encourage you to just put those in the drop-down comment section. You could also email us at questions@nafwb.org, and you'll notice we're often doing podcasts around those areas to try to help churches take advantage of those opportunities. Now, what are the threats to your church? So what are the elements that could be internal or external that pose a risk to the existence of your church? And threats are things that they could lead to even the death of your church if they're not really addressed. And so some internal threats are hidden sin. That's definitely what Jesus is getting at in Revelation 2 and 3. Sin not being dealt with.
Big one.
The big one, disunity, planned overthrow, like a planned coup in the church, micromanaging of the church, or I think you term it a boss family, that runs everything, and ineffective ministry. So,
or lack of biblical leadership too.
Excellent.
Those that are there
Yes, good,
that have
good.
not they're not really qualified. They shouldn't be up there. So.
Don't meet the criteria, and so you've got to look at that. And these are pretty serious, and will require probably quicker action to keep from getting the church off track. Other threats could be like low staff morale or volunteer morale, low pay for staff, lack of purpose, internal bickering, power struggles, these kinds of things. We have listed for external threats the pandemic,
Wow.
Because we do have folks wondering, or is there a segment that will not come back? That's a threat. Economic upheaval, some government laws. We think there could be some trouble coming perhaps our way. Anti-Christian attitudes, maybe by some of the government leaders in your area. Maybe a poor public image of the church. That's a threat. Anti-biblical cultural trends. We're seeing a lot of that. And then emergence of new churches. Really? Well, I remember when I was pastoring, I went somewhere and a new church was coming. I thought, oh, okay. I looked and they were putting stuff out like, this is not your grandfather's church. And I realized basically they were saying, well, you got old people in your church. It's not a good thing. And so sometimes those are a bit of a threat.
I know, again, and usually when we talk, we have pictures in our mind of, a church, a very good church. But, a couple of mega churches were within 2 blocks of it. And, people if people are searching and they're looking at this other things we talked about,
right. Shiny objects.
Shiny objects.
Yeah.
They go, oh, wow,
here's a good programs.
Oh, what's that little, brick church doing over there, with this?
Yes.
In front of these mega, they need to. Seriously, people kind of like, well, they just need to boil that down, but you can't. But there's some threats you really don't have any control over. Like the pandemic, we had zero control.
Right.
Or if there's an economic upheaval, and all of a sudden there's a stock market drop, and there are factors that are out there we don't have any control over. But those are threats, man.
They are.
They are real. They're real.
We've got some others we found: small town, aging population. Competition for new members. That's kind of like the whole, a church, that advertisement was really not thinking of we're all in this together. Felt like they were trying to get the people out of our church, So it is sometimes an issue, competition for new members, economic hardship in the community. And so you're looking and you're thinking, what is there out there that could harm our church, you see. And so we've gone through the strengths, we've gone through the weaknesses. We do want to notice in the Scripture, threats are laid out, and it tends to be where they were into a different doctrine. You see it in Ephesus, they left their first love. You see in Smyrna, that was an external threat of persecution, what was brought on. Pergamos, it was a false doctrine that refers like Balaam's doctrine and so forth. And so you see it all the way through in the Scripture that was usually something to do with sin. And some of the things we're dealing with today, it could be more of a consumer mentality as opposed to people like setting up roots and being willing to stay, and kind of like a Titus 2 model, where you've got older people working with younger people in the church and seeing that as a good thing as opposed to something that's kind of negative. And so what we're really saying, Brother Clint, is you take an honest assessment. These are our strengths. These are our weaknesses. These are the opportunities we have. These are our threats. And then you take that and you develop goals and strategies to address, you capitalize on the strengths, minimize weaknesses or address the weaknesses, seize opportunities, and to kind of deal with the threats
as much as we possibly can. Yeah.
I'll mention what we did as a church when I saw that little sign. It's like, we're not your grandfather's church. Then we kind of, as a church, we tried to capitalize on that. We had some older people at that time, World War II veterans or whatever, and we tried to stress to folks like parents, isn't it nice that your kid can talk to somebody that was in the Battle of the Bulge? We'd have like these Titus 2 luncheons where they would go and different people would sit at tables. They would ask certain questions. It was a strategy to deal with where people are kind of saying, not really honoring or that kind of thing, And so we had a strategy to kind of push back a little bit and say, no, it is good. Titus 2 is talking about how older people teach younger people and so forth. And so we looked at each threat and tried to develop a way to mitigate that, make it not so damaging. And then we would view that like a strength as having some of the older people with a legacy in the church. How can we accentuate that, And really that's what we're talking about.
Threats
doing,
can become opportunities. They
yes.
really can. And I think, again, I'll have to go to the missionaries on that. But our church, and I hope it's okay to mention one, but
Absolutely.
San Jose, and
Yes.
where Matt Price is right now. And they have had over 100 visitors since COVID, that first-time visitors.
Yes.
Just because they happen to follow the church on Zoom, and so what could have been, oh man, what are we going to do? People can't come, and the church, really took that opportunity. So this threat became an opportunity
Absolutely.
that has produced, really good fruit, and we're just thankful for what God's doing. But I think we've seen that happen here in the States too, and we see that happen around the world, where something, even an economic upheaval, it can teach us to be better stewards.
Yes,
yes. You can take that and say, okay, our income is down. How can we adjust our budget? We don't have to get angry about all this stuff. We really can say, hey,
what can we do?
What can we do? Let's look at it.
So really, you're saying basically there was a threat, San Jose, which the world, we're shut down. So then, but they had the opportunity, and notice earlier we did have that up there as the internet. So they started live streaming their services. Churches looked at it a little bit different in their population, more of a secularized culture.
Very much so. Very much so.
It gave people shut in, stir crazy a little bit, started looking online, and it actually enhanced their ministry. And so that's what we're really talking about, analyzing your situation, strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and then setting up a strategy to address that.
Absolutely.
That was a good one, Brother Clint.
Yeah, and there's hope.
Yes.
I mean, we do have, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I say to people a lot that, this is one of my things that have run over my mind. Sometimes we have more faith in Satan to mess things up than we do in God to get them straight. And, I don't want to be that person. I want to be that person that said, Satan's mighty, God's almighty. And, it's his church, and he's going to build his church. And I don't want to be that person that said, woe are we. Man, there's hope. There's a great hope for the church. And I'd say, let's think that way. And, set these goals, objectives. And, I've written a lot of strategies, and I tell people they're not worth the paper they're written on if people don't believe in them. So, you want this evaluation to be honest and with a clear objective of, of benefiting from it. So not just do it just to do it. So
that's right. And if you go back to the Revelation 2 and 3, we keep going back to that. He gave their strengths, he gave their weaknesses or the threats they encountered, but he told them, what you need to do. You need to repent, you need to persevere, you need to hold fast. And so what you're saying is don't just have a defeatist attitude. I think what I hear you saying is look at the situation, and a sovereign God, all-powerful God can help us find a way out and use it for His glory.
Absolutely.
Well, we really would appreciate your comments. Put those in the comment section. And, of course, these are things that we could try to help you with. If you'd like that, just send us an email at questions@nafwb.org. And then we encourage you to like this on Facebook, share it, if you will, to the various individuals that you encounter. And just remember, everything that we do for the Lord as we work together, it can be a good thing. We want to do our best for Him, and we truly are better as we work together.
Better together. Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us today.